On today's episode, we remember Claude Lemieux, husband, father, grandfather, and four-time Stanley Cup champion.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Zane Begg, and I am your Locked On Kraken host today. And today we're going to remember Claude Lemieux. One quick disclaimer here. This is going to talk about some serious topics, suicide and depression. If you need help, please call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, or text HOME to 741-741 for the crisis text line. Also, you don't need to be suicidal to text 988 if you're just having a rough day, if you just need emotional help, if you just need somebody to vent to, that is what that's there for. Claude Lemieux was one of the most fierce players in the history of hockey, and I did a segment on him on Thursday, but I wanted to do a full episode because I just wanted to give the proper space for such an interesting and an important person in hockey history. This is a Kraken show, and what does he have to do with the Kraken? He was a player agent, and he represented a couple of Kraken players, Oscar Fiskal-Molgaard and Kim Saarinen, and he was found dead by suicide on May 28th, and he was 6 years old. So who was Claude Lemieux? Well, let's start with him as a player. He was drafted 26th overall in the 1983 draft, the pick after Lane Lambert, and he was one of the greatest playoff risers in NHL history. He was not a remarkable regular season player, 136 all-time in regular season goals, and even he was that high only because he just played a ton of games. He played a ton of seasons. But when it came to the playoffs, he was an animal. He had multiple seasons where he scored more playoff goals than he did regular season goals. In the 86 Cup, he had 1 goal in the regular season. He had 10 in the playoffs. 139th regular season all time in goals scored, but in the playoffs, he's 9th. Game-winning goals, he's tied for 3rd with Joe Sakic. Only Brett Hull and Wayne Gretzky have more. I mean, he was one of the absolute monsters. Won 4 Stanley Cups with 3 teams. Won the Conn Smythe for playoff MVP in 95, and just truly a bright lights merchant. When the bright lights were brightest, that was when he was his best. He also wasn't going to win any Lady Byng trophies because he was a agitator. His style of play was to use a stick and use his body and get people under the skin and draw penalties, and he did not seem to have any hesitation to hit a player if it was dirty or not dirty, and that would culminated during the Western Conference Finals against Detroit. Detroit was in the Western Conference at the time before realignment because of expansion, and it's Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals. And May 29th, 1996, almost exactly 30 years ago, he hits Chris Draper of Detroit from behind, and it's right next to the Detroit bench, and his whole face just kind of falls on the bench part, the board there. And it shatters his face. He has a broken orbital bone. His jaw is broken in several places. His teeth are broken. And he needed reconstructive surgery, he needed facial reconstruction surgery. His mother didn't recognize him when she visited him in the hospital. And it was really horrible. And then Claude Lemieux didn't even apologize afterward. He said, "Oh, I made Chris Draper famous. I made him a lot of money by making him famous, by hitting him this way." And just like, what are you doing, man? And I say this as someone who grew up an Avalanche fan. And, now that I'm recapping this 30 years ago, it's like, wow, it's really hard to justify Lemieux's actions here. But yeah, that's what happened. And then, the Avalanche, they go on, they win the Stanley Cup that year. Lemieux suspended for the first 2 games of the Stanley Cup Finals, and that's it. And then he plays games 3 and 4. They end up sweeping Florida, so they win the Cup in 4 anyway. And meanwhile, Darren McCarty, the Detroit Red Wings enforcer, he is seething. He's thinking about this because Chris Draper is his best friend, and Claude Lemieux is remorselessly broke his friend's face and then didn't even say sorry about it. And he's thinking the whole summer, and he's watching the Avalanche win the Stanley Cup, and he's watching Claude Lemieux skate around with the cup, and he's just furious. He's seething. And so the next year, Detroit, first couple games against, they played 4 times that season. The first 2 times, the Avalanche, it was like Claude Lemieux was injured and he wasn't available. And then one of the times it was in Colorado. And so I guess that wasn't the time to get the revenge. But then it was May 27th, I want to say, fight night at the Joe, March 26th, 1997, excuse me. March 26th. And it was in Detroit. And it was like a rough game already. There were a couple of fights, and then all of a sudden, just like nonsense breaks out, and like people who would never fight start fighting. And Igor Larionov and Peter Forsberg, who were both like not fighters at all, especially Larionov, they're like tussling, and then Brendan Shanahan, he's out there, and Darren McCarty is occupied with Adam Foote, the Avalanche defenseman, and Brendan Shanahan of the Red Wings, he's like, oh, Lemieux's out there, Lemieux's on the ice. Let me make sure that. Because McCarty made it pretty clear that he's like, hey, Lemieux's mine. Like, I got this guy. So Shanahan skates over and he starts occupying Adam Foote just for the sole purpose of giving McCarty the opportunity to go over to Lemieux. Well, Lemieux is, he sees him, but instead of dropping the gloves like you normally see in hockey, McCarty just cold cocks him. He just punches him right in the face. Like out of nowhere. And so then Lemieux, he goes down and he's like, and then McCarty's on top of him. And he's like punching him and he can't get up because he was surprised with cold cock. And so then he got criticism for turtling. And it's like, I don't know what you're supposed to do in that situation, but regardless, it was the perception was that Lemieux didn't stand up for himself, which is honestly not true throughout his career. This wasn't someone who would, it's not like Martin Pospisil, who lays a bunch of dirty hits, but then won't fight. Lemieux had at least 32 or 38 fights. He may have had 52, depending on who you look at. But I mean, he definitely dropped the gloves. But in this case, it was not that. And McCarty he just beat the stuffing out of him. And then everyone started fighting and the goalies started fighting. There's blood on the ice and there's blood on the jerseys. And it's just like absolute nonsense. Like everybody on the ice is just fighting at the same time, including the goalies. It was nuts. It was just crazy. And so then they clear the ice and Detroit ends up winning in overtime in that game. And that was such a uniquely unifying moment that they're like, hey, remember that time that we punched Claude Lemieux and we really, really took it to him. And that was the thing that they gave them the confidence, according to them, that they could beat Colorado and win the Stanley Cup because they were in a 41-year cup drought. And like the previous years, they had the best record and they lost in the first round. And then the next year they had, they made the Stanley Cup finals and then they were heavily favored and they got swept by Claude Lemieux's Devils. And the next year they set the record for most wins in a season. They lost to Claude Lemieux's Avalanche. And it's like, are we ever going to win the cup? And we can't beat these guys. And they lost the previous 3 meetings that regular season to Colorado. And then it was like, but you know what? I remember when we beat the tar out of Claude Lemieux. And then that became the rallying cry. This guy was so hated. He was so reviled. And then it just kept going. Just, the next year, after the fight night at the Joe. So the Red Wings, they beat Colorado in the Western Conference Finals in 97. They go on to win the Stanley Cup. And then that year, the following year, now Detroit's the Cup champions, and Lemieux and McCarty, they're standing next to each other at the opening faceoff, and they decide to just go. And this time it's a proper hockey fight, and they both drop the gloves and they go at it for a really long time. And then they go to the box, and then it just kept going. And the next year in 97, there was another insane brawl where everyone's fighting and the goalies are fighting again. Like now you have 2 goalie fights. And then, then it happened again between these 2 teams. And there was another game a year later where, everyone's fighting and then like the goalies are getting to a fight, and like Dominic Hasek, wanted to fight Patrick Waugh, but he skated over and he fell, and the linesman broke it up. So we never actually got 3 goalie fights between 2 teams. But the fact that this was even in play was just nuts. It was just crazy. I mean, really just absolutely pure, raw, unadulterated, nuclear weapons grade hatred between these 2 teams. And it wasn't based out of, it wasn't a rivalry based out of geography, like the Battle of Alberta, or some long time 100-year-old thing. It's like the Bears and the Packers, they've hated each other, they played each other for 100 years, and they're rivals. These were just two teams that hated each other, like pure hatred. And then the other thing was these were the two best teams in hockey. They, from 96 to 2002, they won 5 of the 7 Stanley Cups between the two teams. So it was the confluence of just insane hatred based off of a real act, and then the two teams being the two best teams in hockey, made this, I think, the greatest rivalry in the history of North American professional sports. And I am just touching the iceberg here. There is a documentary on ESPN Plus. If you have that, it's called Unrivaled. There's also a shorter version on YouTube. I'll put a link to that. If you have the time, go check it out. I really urge you to do so. But the hatred that Claude Lemieux elicited was really unlike anything I'd seen. Darren McCarty, after that 97 fight in November 97, so this was the year after they won the cup and had got the retribution. Darren McCarty, in the 2 games without Claude Lemieux, had 95 penalty minutes. In the 2 games with Claude Lemieux, he had 240 penalty minutes. Darren McCarty hated Claude Lemieux with every ounce of his being, and he was not alone. When TSN did a panel or a feature, they went back and they looked and they said, okay, who are the most hated players in hockey history? Number 1 was Sean Avery, and the number 2 was Claude Lemieux. And so that was his legacy as a player. And it's on one hand, his name is on the cup 4 times. And so it is not entirely accurate to say it's an unflattering legacy. But how he was perceived as a person, especially for people who were not his teammates, was not so flattering. And he retired as one of the most hated players in the history of hockey. Now, coming up, we're going to talk about the redemption. And because there's a second act. And Claude Lemieux ended up going from one of the most hated people to one of the most beloved. The NBA playoffs are here and every possession matters. And if you're looking to get even closer to the action, FanDuel has a great offer to get you started right now. New customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right. Turn $5 into $150 in bonus bets just for getting started. I like using FanDuel during the playoffs because everything I need is right there in one place, and you can check stats, you can check trends, you can check matchups before making your picks. So it makes everything feel a lot more informed. And whether you're looking at player props or just following your favorite stars, it adds another level of excitement to every game. It's a really easy app to navigate, and it makes playoff basketball even more engaging from start to finish. And if you look at the NBA Finals, the San Antonio Spurs are minus 200 over the New York Knicks, which are plus 168. But the most important thing by far is that the Western Conference representative is the San Antonio Spurs and not the evil, dastardly Oklahoma City Thunder, who were defeated by San Antonio in 7 games. And so the Stolen Sonics will not repeat their title. That's by far the most important part. But you can head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. After Claude retired, he played some with the Stars, and then he came back at like age 43 after a 5-year absence and played for the Sharks for a handful of games, and then he retired. He became a player agent, and he was a father figure to them. He specialized in European players coming over to North America and helping them adjust to life in North America and helping them to acclimate. And so he had clients like Tim Stützle, Mo Seider, Frederick Anderson, the goalie for the Carolina Hurricanes. We'll talk about him in a moment. And then, as I mentioned previously, Kraken players Oscar Fisker-Molgaard and Kim Saarinen. The thing that I thought was interesting was he was very kind. He was very kind to everybody. The stories that I ran into Claude Lemieux, and I was very surprised at how nice he was. And then, as an agent, he would treat people with respect universally. Never heard, as media people, sometimes you can reach out to agents and talk to them and get their side of the story and just kind of, see what's going on. A lot of them don't contact you back, but Claude Lemieux was famous for always responding to messages, always responding to phone calls, always giving people the time of day, even when he didn't know them, and how you treat people when you don't gain anything from treating them nicely and you treat them nicely anyway, I think is one of the largest revelations of character. And he turned into a beloved person, someone who I could not find anyone say a bad thing about. And he was so kind and he cared about people. Jeff Merrick, who was a big Peter Forsberg fan, he had Claude Lemieux on his show and his podcast and 32 Thoughts. And Claude knew that that Jeff Merrick loved Peter Forsberg. And so he brought Peter Forsberg. He brought his teammate over. And it was just because he knew that it would make Jeff Merrick happy. And it made Jeff Merrick incredibly happy. And he talked about this the other day on his podcast at Daily Faceoff now. He was someone who treated people with kindness and respect. And there was a redemption. And then he was the torchbearer for Game 3 of the Western Conference Finals at the Bell Center, because he was a legendary Canadian helping them win the 86 Cup. And he had a Game 7 overtime winner, which I think was the first ever Game 7 overtime winner in NHL history, playoff history. And he, then 3 days after this, he took his own life, and the response was very, very sad. Pierre LeBrun still struggling so much with Claude Lemieux's death. He was someone I talked about about the game and the business of the game. I loved our conversations because I learned so much. Over the past year, he had mentioned to me his desire maybe to run a team one day. He would have been a great GM. He actually talked to me about throwing his hat in the Maple Leafs opening. He didn't. I talked to him just a few weeks ago. I was so happy for him that he carried the torch in Montreal before Game 3. I'm still in shock, still coming to grips with it. Freddie Anderson. Claude made an unimaginable impact on me during the more than 15 years that he was a part of my life. I almost feel sorry for people who didn't have an opportunity to get to know him beyond his achievements and impact on the ice. As phenomenal as his hockey career was, he was an even better human being. From day one, he made me feel like I was part of his family, treating me with care, compassion, loyalty, and love, as if I was his own son. He had a similar effect on members of my own family, leaving a lasting impression on every life that he touched. I cannot imagine the pain Claude was in, and I pray that he is in a better place now. My thoughts are with Deborah, Brendan, Claudia, and the entire Lemieux family as we grieve together. Claude's spirit will remain in my heart always. It's just a handful. It's just a sampling of things that people said. The players that he represented really seemed to love him. His kids seemed to love him. His grandparents or grandkids seemed to love him. You know who else loved him? Darren McCarty. This is Darren McCarty at his 50th birthday party with his friend, Claude Lemieux. And he's blowing out the candles with Claude Lemieux standing next to him because they were friends. Because after Lemieux retired and he became the person that he became, he won everybody over. Everybody loved him, including Darren McCarty. Just heard the news on Claude Lemieux. This is extremely sad, no matter what feelings from past or present you hold. My thoughts and prayers to his family and friends and people who got to see the person off the ice wasn't the person on. As I've said and will always call it as I see it, if you're on the ice with Claude Lemieux and you turn your back, you are an idiot. But off the ice, I'll turn mine. And please, if you're struggling at all, please reach out and talk to someone. Godspeed, my friend. And there's so many stories, so many people coming out. Ken Danico getting choked up because he said he could always rely on Claude Lemieux for support and friendship. Terry Fry talks about after the Columbine shootings, how he found out that one of the grieving families, they just hadn't been home very much because, one of their children were injured in the shooting. And so he sent over he was like, oh, what can I do? What can I help? And they're like, no one's cleaned the house. And so he just like set up a cleaning crew to pay for the house and not advertised. It's just something that somebody found out that he did. And it was just a nice little thing. And that's just kind of end up being who he was. And that is the redemption of all this, is that who you are and who you've become up to a certain point isn't who you permanently are. Claude Lemieux retired as the second most hated player in the history of hockey, according to TSN. And then by the time, 17 years later, you can't find anyone to say a bad thing about him, including Darren McCarty. They were gonna hang out again this summer. McCarty found out even before the news broke. He found out from Chris Draper. It's just weird how all this happened and how life works. But that's the inspiration there, is that he assembled his reputation by repeated small acts of looking after people. It wasn't a big grand gesture. It wasn't like he saved an orphanage or anything like that. He just treated people well, and he did that over and over again. And he did that with everybody he came across. And that ends up being his legacy, or at least part of his legacy. I mean, what he did as a player, good and bad, is always going to be part of his thing. And it was such an important era-defining thing that, that Claude Lemieux did with the hit on Chris Draper, and that sparked everything. But that's not his legacy anymore. That's not his sole legacy. The thing that people remember, the people that people take away from him, was how he treated other people and how he treated people with kindness and respect. And you're not stuck being the person that you've always been, because if you are still making choices and you start making different choices, you start making better choices, you can be a different person. You can be a better version of you. And that is the inspiration from all this, then also the tragedy, because he, by all appearances, seemed to have everything going for him. Loving family, a great playoff resume, a good player resume, loved by the fans in Montreal. And, in a lot of ways, he did it. He redeemed himself. But he still carried clearly so much pain, and it was too much. So let's bring this back to the Kraken a little bit, and then we'll close out coming up after this. ED is way more common than most guys think. Millions of guys deal with it at some point, and that's exactly why HIMS offers a straightforward way to handle it. HIMS connects you with licensed healthcare providers online, giving you access to legitimate ED treatment options from the comfort of your home. No awkward appointments, no pharmacy lines, just a straightforward process that makes it easier to take care of yourself. The whole process is simple. You just complete a quick online intake, and a provider reviews your information, and if treatment is right for you, it ships directly to your door in discreet packaging, which makes the whole experience feel private and stress-free. They also offer options like sildenafil, the generic for Viagra, at a fraction of the cost, plus other treatments, so you can find what works best for you. It's straightforward, transparent, and designed to make getting care feel easy. To get simple online access to personalized, affordable care for ED, hair loss, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/lockedonnhl. That's hims.com/lockedonnhl for your free online visit. Hims.com/lockedonnhl. Prescription required. See website for details and important safety information. Sildenafil is a generic version of Viagra. Viagra is a registered trademark of Viatris. Specialty LLC. Hims is not affiliated with or endorsed by Viatris. Get your daily Locked On Kraken fix completely ad-free by joining the Everydayer Club today. Start your 7-day free trial right now and get closer to your team without the interruptions. Click the link in the show notes or go to lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer to claim your free trial. One thing I want to caution about is the speculation that this was CTE. His family did say that they were donating his brain to the Boston University CTE Center for Research, and he may have had it, he may have not. We don't know. It's the sort of thing you don't know until you cut open his brain. It is likely he did, but also, even if he did, we should be really careful about saying that the reason for his depression and suicide was because of CTE, because even if it played a role, treating it as if that is the only explanation then makes it sound like it is something that only happens to people who play a violent sport like football or hockey, and then that's not true, because there are plenty of people who deal with depression and struggle with depression. But we do know that Claude Lemieux did have depression because this was confirmed by his family. There is a contradiction here. There is a paradox here of sorts, which is that Claude Lemieux was very helpful to everyone around him. It seemed he spent the second half of his life helping people. He was an agent, and his clients, the players that he represented, describe him more as family than representative. And he was there. He answers people's calls, the messages, and he showed up. He shows up for people, and he just gave people his time, but he was not able to then, after holding up everyone else, was not able to hold up himself. And just because you see somebody who's strong, who's the helper, doesn't necessarily mean they're drowning. They're not drowning. A lot of men are set up for this because they're taught from a very early age that boys don't cry, that vulnerability is weakness, that showing emotion is not manly, and you want to be a man, you don't want to be a boy, and that you skin your knee, you don't cry, you just walk it off. You don't show your pain. You don't show that you're hurt. You keep it. And what that does then is, by the time you get older, by the time you're grown, you learn that the only emotions you're allowed to express are anger and frustration. And then those become the only two emotions that a lot of men ever let out. And what that does then, it turns every other feeling into a secret. It's fear, sadness, the sense that you're just not okay. These are just internalized, and they're kept buried, and then life happens and bad things happen, hard things happen, like they do with everybody. You lose your job, your marriage falls apart, you have an injury, your body breaks down, and now you have this real thing. You have real problems that life is giving you. You have no place to put it. And then you don't have the tools to manage your emotions. Nobody taught you how to express or put a name to what you're feeling. And so then it's just like years of this. You stop reading, pain is no longer then a signal that something is wrong, but is rather something that there is something wrong with you. And then you just get so caught up in that, and that emotion is a flaw, and that it's proof that you're not measuring up and that you're not the strong one. Because if you're stronger, you wouldn't feel this way. You wouldn't feel fear or anxiety or sadness. And then there's this other part, which is that for a lot of men, they feel like your worth, and people also attach external worth to this, is that your worth is tied to what you produce. That you're the provider and the protector and the one who's supposed to be solid so everyone can lean on you. You're the strong one. And then there's a reason why suicide rates go up quite a bit during hard economic times, specifically for men. You lose your job, you lose your work, you lose your money, you lose your standing. And now if your whole value is tied up in that, then it disappears, and then your whole worth disappears with it. And then a guy who feels that way isn't going to turn around and say like, I admit that he's scared and that he needs somebody, because if he believes in that his worth is in holding it all together, then asking for help feels like it's proof that you failed. This was how I was raised. This is not me speculating. This is just this is how I was taught. You do not show emotion, period. Boys don't cry. You do not show emotion. Yeah, anger and frustration. Okay, sure, I guess, but that's it. Fear? Come on, man. That's just it traps people. It traps people and it puts them in these situations where they feel like they have no escape, and then they don't have anywhere to turn, and then we lose people. We lose good people there. We have some athletes are now at least willing to talk about this publicly. The Kraken had an initiative in 2022 where they talked to some Kraken players, none of whom are still with the team. Brandon Tanev, Chris Drieger, Riley Shahan, and Hayden Fleury, Cale Fleury's brother, where they talked about their mental health struggles. And then, Linus Ullmark, the Ottawa goalie, he has talked about his struggles with mental health. He took some time away and he talked about how he has demons and how he's broken and still healing. Victor Hedman of the Tampa Bay Lightning stepped away from the game to focus on his mental health. And then Victor Wembanyama, the star center for the San Antonio Spurs, he's like, I refuse to carry the burden of having to hide my emotions, which I think is just such a profound quote. And I love that. I love that so much for him. He is, if he stays healthy, I think he will be a really, really famous, influential athlete. And I love that he is just first and foremost, up front being about being emotions and showing his emotions. And he's just not afraid to show it. And I love that. And it's just so authentic. But a message to you, if you are listening to this and you are in a dark place, if you feel like you are underwater and there's this weight that is holding you down and you can't enjoy the world because everything is happening around you, but you can't really experience it because there is this fog, this rot that is just consumed you, and you can't feel joy and you can't experience things, and you don't want to burden anybody. And it feels like this is just how the world is, and this is how it is. And I'm telling you, your brain is lying to you. That is one of the hallmarks of this terrible disease. And it is a disease. It is an illness. It is not a weakness. It is not a flaw. It is not a character shortcoming. This is a treatable illness, alcoholism or lupus or depression. These are all diseases and they all require a treatment. And there's nothing wrong with you for being sick. And if you are overwhelmed, you can call or text 988. The 988 line is there. If you're overwhelmed and you don't have the ability to call, you can just text. And you can just text 988. You can also go to 988lifeline.org and chat there, and you can chat with a person. You also don't need to be suicidal. You do not need to be near the edge. If you are just having a bad day, whether, as it says on the website, whether facing mental health struggles, emotional distress, alcohol or drug use concerns, or just need someone to talk to, our caring counselors are here for you. You are not alone. You don't have to prove to anyone that you're strong or that I don't need help. I'm too much of a I'm too stoic for that. You have to do that, and you can just text or call 988. That's it. For me, I think sports has always been a really important escape, and I love. This big reason why I love the Kraken. They give me a routine. They give me something to look forward to every day. They give me a sense of community. Everydayers probably care a lot about the Kraken, because I'm guessing if you're listening to a Kraken podcast in May, a month after they missed the playoffs, you probably aren't a casual Kraken fan. And if you're coming in because you saw this about Claude Lemieux, welcome. But the Kraken, they've done that for me. And during the 90s, the Avalanche and the hockey and the 93 Canadians and the 95 Devils Cup runs. Those were a big escape for me. And when I had nothing going on in my life, at least I had hockey. And then after COVID, I really was struggling hard. And the Kraken, they really helped me. They really helped pull me out of this darkness and this just feeling of loss of self. And so sports can help. And, it's not a substitute for talking to people, but it is a healthy escape. And it is a place to, put your attention. And it's then one of the reasons why I care so much about the Kraken, despite the on-ice product, because there's a whole lot about the hockey team that I love. The colors, the people, the arena, the music, the DJ, the organist, the way they run an organization, the people who work there, and on and on and on. I could just do a roll call of all the great things. And that is just my escape. And it's a big reason why I do this podcast. It's a big reason why I immerse myself in Kraken hockey, baby, because that is how I don't have to deal all the time with the horrors of the real world, especially stuff I can't control, like politics. It is also little things. So if you're struggling, please contact 988. Or you can also text home to 741-741 for the crisis text line. And again, you don't need to be on the edge to contact 988. So please do so if you're just having a bad day. You want to vent, and go call or text or go on the website 98lifeline.org, and you can open up the chat thing. You can talk to somebody there. If you're on the outside and people who may or may not be struggling with this, check in on them. Even the strong ones, just check in. The people who always seem fine, because fine is just like the easiest thing in the world to say. How are you doing? I'm doing fine. Check in on the helpful ones, check in on the ones that everyone leans on, check in on the one who's checking in on everyone else and make sure they're okay. Or just check in on the silent ones, the people you haven't heard in a while. Don't wait for them to show you that or tell you that something is wrong, because often they won't. They almost always don't. And depression can mask. Robin Williams was so joyful and funny and hilarious, and he had deep depression, and he committed suicide. And then it also doesn't matter how successful you are. I mean, Robin Williams or Claude Lemieux, 4 Stanley Cups, a Conn Smythe, 4 kids, 2 grandkids, a furniture business, a loving wife. It doesn't matter how much you've done, how much you've accomplished. Your brain can lie to you. And that is one of the big through lines of all of this, is that your brain just lies to you, and it tells you it's not okay, and it's not going to be okay, and it will never be okay. And this is how it'll always be. And that is not the case. So check in. And you don't have to check in once and then be like, okay, fine. Just be around. Just be around if you can, and just show up and be present. You don't have to fix anybody. You have to be responsible for their life problems. You can just show them that they don't have to be useful to you in order to be worth your time. They don't have to be the strong one to have somebody else in their corner, and that's okay to express vulnerability, or express fear, or express concern, or express sadness. And just sometimes somebody knowing that someone else cares about them is enough. And it really does not need to be a big gesture. There was a stretch when I first moved to Seattle where I did not know anyone in the city, and I was really, really struggling. And I was sitting at Charlie's on Broadway, which does not exist anymore. Rest in peace to their pepper pot soup, which was not made with real Yanni Gourd, just imitation Yanni Gourd. And the server for like no reason. She just like tousled my hair. Just tousled my hair as she walked past. And in that, I mean, it's been like 20 years since that happened. And I still think about that sometimes because in that second, somebody just acknowledged that I existed. And it was like, oh, I do exist. Like, I'm not invisible. Because I like my coworkers were the only people I knew. And I hated my coworkers because they're all, for the most part, terrible. But you don't know what a small kindness can do for the person on the other end. So, just do it anyway. Claude Lemieux, he was, let's throw Kitten on the screen real quick here. He's survived by his wife, Deborah, his kids, Brendan, Claudia, Michael, and Christopher, and then 2 grandkids. And he gave us some of the most unforgettable moments in hockey and the most intense rivalry in the history of professional North American sports. And I think he was a complicated person. He was a villain to every team he played against. And then he became a hero to, it seemed, everyone who encountered him in life. And what a beautiful redemption story with a heartbreaking ending. I think the best way to honor Claude Lemieux is to reach out or ask for help and not wait until you can prove that you need it, and to check in on the people around you. And I think that's the best way we can remember who somehow went from, we do not need people in this world like Claude Lemieux, to we need more people in this world like Claude Lemieux. And if you told me that 30 years ago, you went back in time, I would be shocked. Partially because there's a time traveler talking to me. Partially because that is a full 180 redemption. And it's just sad that he's gone. And I will miss you very, very much, Claude Lemieux. You were an unforgettable player. And you were a real one. Rest in peace, Claude. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On Kraken. We will be back tomorrow. Make sure you subscribe and follow us so you get all the latest episodes. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Kraken ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonpodcast.com/everydayer to join the club. For those of you on video, we send you to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel on audio. Make sure this is one of your 2 daily listens. For Davy Jones Locker Room, I'm Zane Begg, and I will see you tomorrow.